It started with the kind of silence that feels heavier than words. Clara sat in the back of the courtroom, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the faint glint of her wedding ring catching the harsh fluorescent light. For 12 years, she had worn that ring as a promise, a constant reminder of the vows she and Daniel had made. Today, it felt more like a chain. She wasn't supposed to be here like this, public, vulnerable, and fighting for dignity, but life has a way of turning without warning, and Daniel had turned most sharply of all. Daniel sat 2 rows ahead, his expensive navy suit fitting like armor, his jaw set in that familiar way that once made Clara feel protected but now only made her want to break something. He was the golden boy of the business world, a self-made millionaire whose company had risen from a small startup in their garage to a corporation whose name was whispered in boardrooms around the country. People admired him for his ambition, his charm, and his so-called loyalty to his family. Clara had once admired him too. The trouble had started subtly. Late nights at the office became later. Business trips stretched longer. He stopped telling her about his meetings, his plans, his dreams. The warmth in his voice when he used to greet her after work faded into an absent-minded, "Hey." Clara had felt the distance growing, but like so many wives who believed in their marriage, she explained it away. He was stressed. He was tired. He just needed space. But then she found the messages. They weren't even hidden well. A forgotten phone on the kitchen counter, a notification flashing with a name she didn't recognize. Curiosity was all it took to turn into devastation. The messages were intimate in a way Daniel hadn't been with her in years, sweet, teasing, laced with promises. Clara read them all in one sitting, her tea growing cold in her hands. The woman's name was Elise, a sleek, ambitious marketing executive who'd joined Daniel's company a year ago. Clara didn't confront him right away. She knew Daniel well enough to predict the deflections, the justifications. Instead, she quietly started gathering proof, screenshots, photos, copies of expense reports showing dinners for two at five-star restaurants, weekend getaways billed to the company. If he wanted to betray her, he would at least pay for it in full. By the time she finally filed for divorce, Clara had more than enough to prove not just infidelity, but corporate misconduct. That was what brought them here today. It wasn't just a divorce hearing, it was a corporate board inquiry, one that would determine the future of Daniel's empire. Her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Nadine, leaned over and whispered, "Ready?" Clara nodded, though her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Nadine rose, her heels clicking on the polished floor, and began her questioning with calm precision. "Mrs. Lawson, can you tell the court when you first became aware of your husband's relationship with Ms. Elise Porter?" Clara took a breath. "March of last year. And how did you discover this relationship?" She told them. She told them about the phone, the messages, the dinners, the hotel receipts. She spoke steadily, refusing to let her voice tremble. The room seemed to shrink around her as she described each piece of evidence. She saw Daniel shift uncomfortably in his seat, his confident mask beginning to crack. Nadine didn't stop there. "Mrs. Lawson, were you aware that these personal expenses were charged to the company's corporate account?" "Yes," Clara replied, her tone clipped. "Repeatedly. And do you have documentation to support this?" "I do." When the documents were entered into evidence, a murmur rippled through the room. Members of the board sat in the back, their expressions darkening as they flipped through the pages. These were not just the missteps of a husband, they were the breaches of a CEO who had used company funds to bankroll an affair. Daniel's lawyer tried to object, claiming irrelevance to the divorce proceedings, but Nadine was ready. "Your Honor, the financial misconduct is directly tied to the division of assets. Furthermore, as Mrs. Lawson holds shares in the company, she has every right to bring this information forward." The judge allowed it. By the time Clara stepped down from the witness stand, Daniel was pale, his jaw no longer clenched but slack. She didn't look at him as she passed. She kept her eyes on the exit sign, the symbol of the freedom she'd been fighting for. During the recess, Clara overheard whispers from the board members. Words like breach of trust and impeachment vote floated through the air. She hadn't come here to ruin Daniel's career, but if it happened, she wouldn't lose sleep over it. When the session resumed, Daniel was called to testify. His voice wavered as he tried to explain the expenses, claiming they were client entertainment and team building. Nadine tore through those excuses like tissue paper. One by one, the receipts, the dates, and the locations painted a picture that no one could defend. By the end of the day, the judge ruled in Clara's favor for a generous settlement, citing Daniel's misconduct as a contributing factor. The board didn't wait long to act either. Before the week was over, they voted Daniel out as CEO. It was unprecedented, but the shareholders had spoken. What no one had anticipated was the board's next move. Clara, with her quiet intelligence and deep familiarity with the company's history, was offered the role of interim CEO. She had been there from the beginning, helping Daniel brainstorm in their cramped apartment, keeping their early finances afloat while he built the brand, even proofreading his investor pitches late into the night. The board saw what Daniel had long ignored. Clara wasn't just the wife behind the man, she was half the reason the company existed at all. When she walked into the executive office for the first time, the irony didn't escape her. The mahogany desk, the city view, the leather chair, these had been Daniel's trophies. Now they were hers. And she didn't take them as symbols of revenge. They were symbols of survival. Of the truth that sometimes, when betrayal strips you bare, it leaves behind only the steel you didn't know you had. Daniel's downfall had been swift, but Clara's rise was steady, deliberate. She wasn't here to gloat. She was here to lead. To prove that the company could stand for something better. She closed the office door behind her, sat in the chair, and smiled, not because she had won, but because she had finally reclaimed her own life. Alright, here's a 1,000-word expansion of Part 2 inches based on your title, told like a dramatic continuation of events. The courtroom was so silent you could hear the slow, deliberate click of Lila's heels as she stepped back from the witness stand. The air was thick, the kind of silence that hums in your ears because everyone in the room is holding their breath. Across the polished oak floor, her husband, Victor Harrow, the man who once made toasts to forever under chandeliers, sat with his lawyer shifting uncomfortably. His jaw was tight, but his eyes kept flickering toward the gallery, where half the city's business press had gathered like vultures waiting for a fresh carcass. Lila had just finished reading aloud a series of emails. They were not merely flirtatious, they were strategic. Each line revealed not only Victor's affair with a younger marketing consultant, but also how he had been funneling company resources into this woman's pet projects. The judge's pen had stopped moving after the first few paragraphs. By the time Lila reached the final email, in which Victor promised to make her the next face of the Harrow empire, the room was buzzing. Victor's attorney tried to object, some nonsense about relevance, but the judge, a woman with a gaze sharp enough to cut glass, waved him down. The financial entanglements are central to this divorce settlement, she said, her tone leaving no space for argument. For Lila, this wasn't about humiliation, though the sweet sting of public exposure had its charm. It was about control. For 10 years, she had lived in Victor's shadow. She had smiled on cue at galas, laughed politely when his associates made crude jokes, and worn designer gowns like armor. But she had also been listening, really listening, to the conversations around those crystal glass dinner tables. She knew the intricacies of Harrow Enterprises better than some of the executives did. When Victor's betrayal first surfaced, Lila didn't scream. She didn't throw things. She did what she always did. She took notes. She gathered financial records, board meeting transcripts, and whispered tips from people who owed her favors. What started as evidence for the divorce quickly became something else, a map of Victor's weaknesses. In court, those weaknesses unfolded like a deck of cards she'd been shuffling for months. Victor's face was flushed now. His lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but Victor's eyes were locked on Lila, a mixture of rage and something else, worry. He had always underestimated her, but in that moment, she could see the dawning realization, she had him cornered. The judge announced a short recess, and the courtroom erupted into murmurs. Reporters darted for the doors, eager to be the first to get the headlines online. Lila remained seated, calm, her pearl earrings catching the light. In the corridor, she could hear Victor's voice, low but furious. "We can't let her near the board," he hissed to his lawyer. She almost laughed. The truth was, she was already closer to the board than he realized. Over the past few weeks, she had been meeting privately with two of Harrow Enterprises' oldest board members, men who remembered the company before Victor's flashy acquisitions and who had grown tired of his risky ventures. Lila had positioned herself not as the scorned wife, but as the steady hand the company desperately needed. When the court reconvened, the judge moved swiftly. The evidence of asset misappropriation was too substantial to ignore. Lila's legal team proposed a settlement. She would receive a controlling stake in Harrow Enterprises, in lieu of a larger cash payout. Victor's side balked, but the judge, noting the clear pattern of misconduct, suggested it was in everyone's interest to avoid a prolonged corporate scandal. An hour later, the papers were signed. By the time Lila stepped out of the courthouse, the winter sun was dipping low, and a wall of cameras waited. She didn't stop to answer questions, but her smile, measured, knowing, was enough to send a ripple through the crowd. That smile said, "I didn't just survive. I won." The next morning, Lila's name was on the press release. Lila Harrow appointed CEO of Harrow Enterprises, effective immediately. She didn't sleep that night, not from nerves, but from strategy. In her new office on the top floor, the skyline stretched before her like an unopened gift. Victor's sleek leather chair felt strange at first, but the moment she leaned back, she felt something she hadn't in years, ownership of her own life. The first board meeting was electric. Half the members were skeptical. Many had been handpicked by Victor, but Lila's preparation was surgical. She walked them through a streamlined operations plan, trimming the bloated vanity projects Victor had funded. She outlined a rebranding campaign focused on trust and sustainability, knowing the public would rally behind the image of a wronged woman restoring honor to a tarnished empire. Her final move was pure theater. She announced the appointment of a new head of marketing, none other than the woman Victor had been seeing. Gasps rippled through the room. Lila let them linger before explaining, "I believe in giving people enough rope. Whether they build with it or hang themselves is up to them." The woman looked startled, but Lila knew her well enough to predict she'd crumble under real corporate pressure. Outside the boardroom, the news spread fast. Social media erupted with hashtags, hashtag Karma Queen, hashtag From Wife to Boss, hashtag Victor Who. Former employees who had quietly endured Victor's arrogance began sending her emails of support. Victor, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. His sudden leave of absence from all public engagements only fueled the narrative that he had been exiled from his own kingdom. For weeks, Lila moved like a storm, closing wasteful divisions, renegotiating contracts, securing new partnerships. But at night, in the quiet of her penthouse, she allowed herself moments of reflection. She thought about the younger version of herself who had once been content to orbit Victor's world. She thought about all the women who stayed silent, who never had the resources or the courage to turn betrayal into a stepping stone. One evening, a reporter asked if she considered herself vindictive. Lila smiled into the camera, the same calm, deliberate smile she had worn in court. "No," she said. "Vindictive people act on emotion. I acted on opportunity. And that was the truth. This wasn't just revenge, it was reclamation." The day the company's quarterly earnings soared above projections, Lila stood at the window of her office, watching the city pulse with life below. She thought about how strange it was that a single moment, opening the wrong email at the right time, had set this entire chain of events in motion. Karma, She decided, wasn't just some cosmic force doling out justice. Sometimes, karma was a woman with a plan, a stack of evidence, and the patience to wait for her moment. And she had just begun. Dash dash dash. Do you want me to also give you a part 3 continuation where Lila's revenge takes an unexpected twist against the woman her husband cheated with? That could turn the story even sharper.